Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks escape the Wisconsin Badgers on the road in Camp Randall, winning a close, hard-fought 16-13 classic Big Ten battle. I have to give applause to both of these teams. This is a game where I am proud in both participants, even though both participants obviously couldn't win, and ties don't exist in college football, and they haven't since over a decade before I was born. But I'm proud of both the Ducks and the Badgers because of the fact that Oregon was playing in its 8th straight conference game. They had traveled thousands of miles week over week over week. The injuries were beginning to pile up. I think the staff is obviously holding back unless they have to unleash their game plan because they want to rest players and they want to save things for future games. Oregon has operated that way since the beginning of the year, where they had some injuries to key players early on, like their center, and they said, no problem, we're not going to force you to play because we need you. So we're going to start a walk-on in Charlie Picard for the first 2 games, and some would say it maybe nearly cost him against Boise State and certainly held him back against Idaho, and there were other players too. I don't just want to pick on the backup center who stepped up admirably and fulfilled his role. But Oregon, well, they faced adversity. They faced a great coaching staff. Many of you mocked me for saying Wisconsin had a great coaching staff, and yes, they just fired Phil Longo, but Mike Tressel is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. Luke Fickell has a proven track record of punching above his weight class, and they did that, and Oregon still beat them. And as for Wisconsin, well, the things that I just said are the reasons why I am proud of them. They punched above their weight class, competed with Wisconsin in the same way they did with Penn State, except Penn State's defense is more explosive, so they got a pick 6 that kind of sealed the game early in the third. Oregon doesn't have that type of defense that's going to be super explosive and force a pick 6. So Oregon had to fight harder to get back in that game and to secure a victory than Penn State did, and they came out and they won. So kudos to both of these teams. I'm going to be breaking down this game, giving you my takeaways and my reaction to these two teams' performance and their battle against each other. But before we do that, I ask you to do a few things for me. I ask you to score a touchdown for the channel, and you can do that by scoring 7 points. The 7th is optional, but point number 1, please like the video to get us into the algorithm. Number 2, subscribe to the channel to help us reach 30,000 subscribers, and so we can also show up in your feed. Number 3, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release videos daily talking about college football, and so that you can get notified when we do our giveaway, where I will be rewarding you, a random amount of you, different gifts for helping us reach 20,000 subscribers. We are the best college football channel on YouTube, and thanks to you, we will become the best college football channel on YouTube. We're the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, but certainly striving to be the best college football channel on YouTube. I got a little bit tongue-twisted there. But at the end of the regular season, we'll be doing a giveaway. Number 4, comment your thoughts down below on this game. 5, share the video around. 6, join the Discord server where we are active and talk about college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And 7th, it's the extra point. It's optional. I appreciate you for getting into the end zone and doing those 6 things, scoring those 6 points. If you want to support the channel monetarily, you can always donate via Super Chats in the comments or by joining the Patreon page. You can do that via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, or purchasing merchandise via my merchandise store. We have some very comfortable hoodies and an Oregon and Wisconsin or any Big Ten school-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt awaiting you. And the link to that, again, in the description down below in the pinned comment. But let's talk about some basic numbers here, go over just how this game operated, and then we can move on into the takeaways for both of these teams, including talking about Phil Longo here. So, looking at Oregon and what the Ducks did in this game, they averaged 4.8 yards per play. That is close to a season low. Very close to a season low, I do believe, if not the season low in yards per play. They did not have anywhere close to a good game offensively. Dylan Gabriel was checking the football down for much of the game. He did not have many intermediate or especially deep balls. Oregon's game plan right out of the gate was vanilla. I could tell they looked disinterested, but they went up 6-0, and I thought to myself, like, I don't even know if Wisconsin can score at all. Maybe this is a 34 or 27 to nothing type game where Oregon does not play well on offense and Wisconsin plays well on defense, but Wisconsin is just so inept on the offensive side of the football for a variety of reasons, including the fact that their backup quarterback is their starter and their wide receivers have been banged up to the point where it may not matter that Oregon has an off game. Well, it did matter. It nearly cost them dearly, nearly cost them everything. And Wisconsin was able to take advantage of some things. They were able to push the ball down the field for just a few drives, enough to take the lead entering the half. And it looked like for a moment that Wisconsin was going to pull this off, that Wisconsin was going to win. And that was just kind of shocking to me, honestly. I thought to myself, oh man, it's going to be another weekend of chaos. And if Oregon loses, it would be very interesting because you'd have Ohio State and Texas just right behind them waiting to take that number one spot. Not that it really matters because all of this stuff would sort itself out. But for Oregon to lose a game like this before the bye week, and they've been undefeated entering this point, I think could be quite heartbreaking and demoralizing. Oregon fans have seen this before, whether it's Mark Helfrich, Chip Kelly, Mario Cristobal. You're oh so close, and then you run into one of these games and kind of fall apart. Well, that didn't happen here. Oregon started off on a 6-0 run. Wisconsin then had a 13-0 run to have a 13-0 lead entering the fourth. Then Oregon finished off the fourth quarter with a 10-0 run. So a lot of back and forth, a lot of bipolar in this game. Oregon on early, getting short fields. Atticus Sappington being a reliable kicker. Middle of the game, Wisconsin tried to take control. They did take the lead, but they were never really in complete control of this game. And then Oregon came back late. In terms of points per play margin, this was a very close game. Oregon at a 0.016 points per play margin, so they only scored 0.016 more points per one of their plays compared to one of Wisconsin's plays. And the Badgers only averaged 3.5 yards per play, which is just absolutely horrific. Showed that not just how damaged their offense is and why Phil Longo was let go, but also how good Oregon's defense can be when it comes to play. On third and fourth down combined, Oregon was 6 of 17. Not great, not even good, but not terrible. They had one turnover that Dylan Gabriel, he threw a ball behind his guy. It got tipped and Wisconsin picked it off in the red zone. That was similar to the Drew Aller fumble on 4th and inches on their first drive against Wisconsin, where that mistake probably prevented what was potentially going to be a dominant performance from the other team from occurring. Like if Penn State gets that 4th and inches, they kick a field goal or they get a touchdown and Wisconsin is not in the lead entering the half, it's safe, there's no type of panic, and it would probably have been similar if Wisconsin didn't turn it over in the red zone. If Dylan Gabriel didn't throw that pick, which again was kind of a deflection, but it was also not the best throw. They're either down by 1 point entering the half, or maybe they're up by 3 points entering the half, and the game isn't in the same amount of doubt. Oregon had 7 penalties for 55 yards, Wisconsin had 8 for 56, so they were pretty even on the penalty front. But really what cost Wisconsin the game was they were 3 of 14. No, not 3 of 14, 2 of 14 on combined third and fourth down. 1 of 2 on third down, or 1 of 12 on third down, 1 of 2 on fourth down. So, look, the Badgers' offense was just not doing the team, not doing the fans, the coaches, the players. They were not helping Wisconsin in any sense of what it means to be a Wisconsin Badger, or Badgers plural, win the game and have a good time. The offense is a lot like Nebraska's. It's irreparable for this season. They're going to have to do things in the preseason to fix the offense. And it is, well, it's kind of telling that you look at a lot of these former Big Ten West schools, and Iowa gets rid of Brian Ferentz last year. Nebraska this year gets rid of Marcus Satterfield. He's still on the staff for now, but he'll be gone at the end of the year, or certainly demoted. Dana Holgerson's the OC now. And then Wisconsin, just like yesterday, fires Phil Longo, gets rid of their offensive coordinator, and they'll be making a hire. And Northwestern, they have questions at offensive coordinator. Purdue fired their offensive coordinator, former Big Ten West school. Minnesota, well, I don't know what they're exactly doing on offense. It's better than what we've seen from PJ Fleck in the previous few seasons. It's the same thing with Illinois. But those are some of the only Big Ten West schools where we can point out, and they're having just some type of success on offense. Is ironically Iowa with their ground game. Not Wisconsin, but Minnesota's a bit everywhere. Wisconsin has had some success at earlier points in the year, but mostly against inferior competition. Against Penn State, against Oregon, against Alabama, even against USC, where they got shut out in the second half. They have not had much success. Oh, don't forget about Iowa either, and Iowa put like a 40-burger on them and blew them out. Wisconsin in this game only scored 13 points. They had under 100 passing yards. They averaged 3.4 yards per pass attempt. They had 130 rushing yards and averaged 3.8 yards per carry. Phil Longo is gone. His time there is done. I think they need to bring in an offensive coordinator who is more willing to run the football. I don't think you need to bring in someone who's antique, who's old in terms of his style of play and what he wants to do. Like, you don't need to hire Paul Chryst, how ironic that would be. You don't need to hire Brian Ferentz or need to hire, I'm trying to think of like anyone who would run a smash mouth operation in a pro style, like Tim Lester. Tim Lester would actually be, I think, a respectable hire for Wisconsin, a good hire. I think he's done a pretty good job at Iowa. But you don't need to hire someone who runs a bad offense because you have won games before with an offense that isn't good. You can shoot high if you're Wisconsin. You've paid money for Luke Fickell. That's why Paul Chryst was fired and Fickell was brought in to win championships. Go out and hire someone innovative who is just more willing to run the football and more willing to get dirty and be physical than Phil Longo. That's what should be done, whether that's Brennan Marion, and outside of him, I mean, maybe Tim Lester, or I've heard some just comments. They're not rumors, but just comments from people saying, well, maybe Luke Fickell can use the network to maybe lure Brian Hartline over or something like that. Or if there's an Andy Kotelnicki that's out there, another one, hire him. I mean, maybe get West Virginia's offensive coordinator. Their offense has actually been pretty good, and Wisconsin has more talent than West Virginia. And I imagine with Fickell's guidance, the offensive coordinator would probably be better coached and better influenced than being under Neil Brown. Or maybe you go out and get Jeff Grimes, who's run a power spread before at BYU and Baylor and now at Kansas. Or maybe you go out and get Aaron Roderick from BYU, who's ran something similar as well. I don't know. Just get someone who is more comfortable running the football, prioritize trench play, offensive line play, and also getting better wide receivers and quarterbacks from the portal or developing and recruiting them from high school. Some positives, though, is the fact that Mike Tressel commands a top-end defense. I almost said top 10. That's a slip-up. I think Mike Tressel is close to being a top 10 defensive coordinator, if not a top 10 defensive coordinator. Wisconsin has certainly a top 25 defensive staff, and I think a top 25 defense as well. They allowed a total of 354 yards, only 16 points, many of which came from short fields, 218 passing yards for 7 yards per attempt. They allowed no passing touchdowns. They had 1 interception, and they allowed 136 rushing yards for 3.4 yards per carry. That's impressive because Jordan James is a really good running back, and James averaged only 4.8 yards per carry. Oregon's longest rush was from Dylan Gabriel for 22, and Wisconsin, they got 2 sacks, and they got 5 TFLs. Wisconsin did a good job all night making Gabriel uncomfortable, getting pressure. There were times where they were beating Oregon's tackles. They were willing to be aggressive. Tressel brought in a really good game plan, and I think he is someone that Wisconsin and Luke Fickell should keep close to their side at all times. They should not let him go. I say that because there are probably other programs who may need a great defensive coordinator, because there always are programs who are undergoing staff changes, and I think Tressel is one of the best in the business. So keep him. I mean, that was the highlight of this game for Wisconsin, is that your defense came to play and held. And I know that they were tired. I know that Tez Johnson was out, but regardless, it's impressive. They held an offense that scored 32 points in Oregon, that scored 32 on Ohio State, could have scored more if they convert that 4th and goal or they don't miss the field goal. I know it's hypotheticals, but Ohio State's defense is very good. And Oregon could have put up 40 if some things went their way on that defense. An offense that put 38 up on Michigan casually, 38 on Illinois, could have put up 70. They put up 35 against Purdue, playing in a similar way that they did against Wisconsin, where they were lethargic. They didn't really care. They held that offense to 16 points. To 16 points. And they scored more points, Wisconsin did. To the offense's credit, what little credit I can give, they scored more points against Oregon than Illinois did, Purdue, Michigan State, as much as UCLA. And honestly, factoring in that Michigan got a muffed punt, kind of a random thing, they kind of scored a similar amount of points to Michigan. Like, Michigan only scored 4 more points, and one of those touchdowns was off of a very weird turnover. So, take from that what you will. Wisconsin's offense was dreadful. They still put up a good effort on both sides of the football. And on defense, man, they came to play. And the defense nearly carried Wisconsin to victory over the number 1 team in the country. Shame that they didn't, because I like Luke Fickell. I like Mike Tressel. And then finally, the Badgers need better players. I've already said this, so it's just going to take a minute or a few seconds to go over it. They were a better quarterback away. If they just had a better quarterback, everything else, same, ceteris paribus, all else constant, they would have won. It's just that simple. If they had better overall players, not only would they have won this game and perhaps won it decisively, they would be 7-3. They could have beaten the following teams. They could have beaten Penn State, could have beaten Oregon, and maybe, you want to play some hypotheticals here, maybe they could have beaten USC. They led them at halftime. Maybe with better players, the Iowa game doesn't get out of hand. I don't think they beat Alabama based off of how the team was playing earlier in the year, and they were worse earlier in the year than they are right now. But maybe things are different from the get-go if they have better players, if they got better skill position players especially, and also better defensive linemen. They're better players away from being a not Big Ten championship caliber team. They'll need more than just a few better players, but they're a few better players away from being a playoff contender. And that for Wisconsin is impressive. So get better players, hire a new good offensive coordinator, and I think Wisconsin will well be on their way to something bigger and better than what they have experienced over the past several seasons. As for Oregon, they overcame several points of adversity. Travel, 8 straight games against conference opponents, a road environment like Camp Randall, at night, a little bit of a time zone change factored in with the travel. They still won. In some instances, not all instances, I don't buy into the win is a win. That's something I have a problem with in relationship to saying the SEC is oh so tough, is when you extrapolate that argument, when you extend it to its logical extreme, basically that translates to a win is a win in the SEC. And that's a lie. That's stupid. Like, LSU losing to Florida might be a fireable offense for Brian Kelly. I know he's not going to get fired, but I think that game is indicative that he is not going to work out at LSU, because Florida, their roster's getting worse and worse and worse every year, and LSU should have won that game statistically. Statistically, they should have dominated, but they can't finish because Nussmeier is at best a good quarterback. He may just be average with good receivers and a good O-line. His O-line quit on him against Florida. And like with Alabama, okay, congratulations that Vanderbilt has its best team in a decade. It's still Vandy. It's still Vanderbilt. And as for Texas, as a friend of mine has said, I've had him on the channel before, Bald Father Bets on YouTube, that's his YouTube channel name, Professional Better. He's told me before that Texas shouldn't be ranked as high as they are given the schedule they've played. So all I'm saying in that argument is most of the people, whether Big Ten, SEC, ACC, or Big 12, who say a win is a win, a lot of that's a lie. A lot of that's coping. That's not the case here at all. My opinion on Oregon has changed slightly as I adjust week to week. I'm more of a week to week kind of guy than a big picture kind of guy. And sometimes that's me overcorrecting. Other times that helps me pick on trends or pick up on trends rather quickly. But with all the travel that happened, with the fact that Oregon is probably Wisconsin dropping that interception away from leading at half and then winning by double digits and maybe even covering that large spread, my opinion on Oregon isn't that much different from before this game, other than the fact that this game reminded me of Oregon's own mortality. Every team this year is mortal. And I don't mean mortality in the sense of you are, let's just talk any undefeated national champion, and they had that one bad game. Miami in 2001 even had one bad game against Boston College where they needed a touchdown at the end to win. Michigan last year against Maryland, one bad game. Well, really two. The Bama game, Maryland game, I don't count Bowling Green because they still dominated and won. One bad game, maybe two, still won those, and one of them was against an Alabama team that was top 10. And the Georgia teams of the 2 years before that. Bad game against Kentucky in 22. Some could maybe say a bad game against Ohio State in 22, even though I think the Buckeyes more times than not beat Georgia due to matchups. And then obviously in 2021, the bad game where they got blown out by Bama and also were held to 3 offensive points by Clemson in the first game. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a bad game in the sense that we've seen this against Boise State. We saw it against Idaho early, and those were earlier games, I know. But then we saw it against Wisconsin and also against Maryland. If we're being really honest with ourselves, no team this year is even close to greatest of all time caliber. It's just not the case. But Oregon is good enough to be number one, and I will talk about that in a few minutes here. But I want to spend a few seconds on discussing how impressive it is that Oregon's defense allowed 28 passing attempts and only 12 completions for 96 yards. Secondary showed out. They allowed 1 passing touchdown and 1 interception. They forced an interception. That's impressive. Oregon has consistently, throughout this season, shown themselves to field one of the better secondaries nationally. That's something to be applauded. Oregon had an interception by Mateo Uyunglele, defensive lineman. It tipped in the air. He caught it. That was the game-sealing pick. But Brandon Johnson, Amari Washington, and Bryce Betcher, members of the pass defense, they had 3 passes defended. Tiatum Tioti and Mateo Uyunglele each had a sack in TFL. Betcher had a TFL. Kobe Savage, Jamari Caldwell had a TFL. Brandon Johnson had a TFL. This is a secondary that is showing off. They're doing well this season. I mean, remember, against Ohio State, yeah, they allowed passing yards, but Ohio State has one of the nation's best wide receiver cores and one of the nation's best QBs. And Oregon was still able to get some pressure on Will Howard, were able to force some mistakes from him, not any turnovers, although we all know that one play to Will Kazmarek should have been an interception, but that was more on Kazmarek than on Howard necessarily. That's the only game they've had through the air that was really disappointing. Against every other team, they've performed fairly well. And I don't think any secondary, and I don't believe this, any secondary, unless they have a defensive line and a front that is one of the best at stopping the run, they're not going to hold Ohio State back through the air. That's not how it works. And it's clear to me that not only Ohio State played one of their best offensive games, especially through the passing game against Oregon, it's also clear to me that Oregon does not have the nation's best rushing defense. They probably do not even have a top 10 rushing defense. They have a very good passing defense, but Wisconsin ran on them similarly to how they ran on Alabama, where They were able to pick up some consistent yardage. They were able to keep Oregon's defense honest. I mean, Penn State did a much better job limiting Wisconsin's rushing attack than Oregon did. But Oregon did a much better job at limiting Wisconsin's passing attack than Penn State did. So just some interesting comparisons there. But this secondary is really good, especially for featuring a lot of new players. Finally, the Ducks are just good enough to be number one. I said this about Ohio State. I'm going to say it here. They are not a GOAT caliber team, but in my book, they're the number one team in the country. And they could go undefeated. If they go undefeated and they put on some dominant performances in the playoff or maybe in the Big Ten championship game, then they can be in that greatest of all time conversation, because they are just good enough to be number one. Won a 10-0 run after trailing 6-13. They won the points per play margin battle. They won a game while only scoring a little over a fifth of a point per play, 0.219 points per play to be exact. And right now they are 11-0. You're undefeated with a win over Ohio State. And if they're able to get healthy entering the playoffs, this is a team that I think, in my book, would be the favorite to win it all. I mean, they are just good enough to be number one. They are. And a lot of teams can say that this year, but I think Oregon is the best argument because they're undefeated, and they have a win over a team that many say is number one, especially power ratings, and that's Ohio State. And Oregon beat them straight up. So the Ducks, even after this game, I think are still in that top-end tier of college football. I very much believe that. And my MVP for the game is Jordan James. He had 27 total touches for 146 yards, 5.4 yards per touch, and he had one rushing touchdown, the touchdown that basically put Oregon back in a position to control the game. He's one of the best running backs in the country. He runs with power, passion, speed, great with ball security, and he's just a very reliable running back. So Jordan James is my MVP for this game. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Canelo OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Slane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Thank you so much again for watching. Remember to check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone. Go Badgers, and go Ducks.